The morning news on YourIowa.com is brought to you by the Commission on U.S. Territories, striving for equal representation around the globe, and by Keep Iowa First, committed to keeping the Iowa caucuses the first in the nation contest in selecting the presidency of the United States. And now, here's your host, Brent Roske.
Good morning, everybody. Just a shameful display yesterday at the U.S. Capitol, and we're going to talk about that with my guest, Al Womble. He's the chair of the Iowa Democratic Black Caucus. But first, tomorrow, you're going to want to tune in. Chris Boyan is the communications director with the United Nations High Commission on Refugees. We're going to talk about conflict zones all over the world and the great work that branch of the United Nations does. So please tune in to that tomorrow. Now, what upset me most yesterday about what happened at the Capitol is not only what happened, but how it was viewed by the rest of the world. So let's just take a quick little snapshot here. Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, called it disgraceful scenes in the U.S. Congress. The U.S. stands for democracy around the world and is now vital that there should be a peaceful and orderly transfer of power. And, BBC News picked that up with the big headline, Johnson condemns disgraceful scenes in the United States. Scott Morrison, Prime Minister of Australia, very distressing scenes at the U.S. Congress. Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland, the scenes from the Capitol are utterly horrifying. So this is how our international friends and neighbors are viewing what happened at the Capitol yesterday. Here's a brief statement from former President George Bush. This is how election results are disputed in a banana republic. I'm appalled by the reckless behavior of some political leaders since the election and by the lack of respect shown today for our institutions, our traditions, and our law enforcement. So many videos, and you've seen most of it. The one that struck me the most was an African-American Capitol police officer with a small little baton getting backed up steps as people just continued to come at him. We're going to talk about that in just a second. Final statement we're going to go over here. President Obama put this out. History will rightly remember today's violence at the Capitol incited by a sitting president. Now that's important, folks. Incited by a sitting president who has continued to baselessly lie about the outcome of a lawful election as a moment of great dishonor and shame for our nation. But we'd be kidding ourselves if we treated it as a total surprise. For 2 months now, a political party and its accompanying media ecosystem has too often been unwilling to tell the followers their truth, that this was not a particularly close election and that President-elect Biden will be inaugurated on January 20th. Their fantasy narrative has spiraled further and further from reality, and it builds upon years of sown resentments. Now we're seeing the consequences whipped up into violent crescendo, and he goes on. So again, condemnation from both sides of the aisle. I could go on and on. People from Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell, everyone was rightfully so upset about what happened yesterday at the Capitol, as am I, as am the people watching this program, I'm sure. Let's bring on our guest here. Mr. Al Womble is the chair of the Iowa Democratic Black Caucus. Thanks for waking up early, buddy. I appreciate you being on the program today. So we both watched the news yesterday. We both saw what happened. And I know you went down to the Iowa Capitol and you recorded a video that I thought was very poignant. And I'm so grateful you're on the program this morning. Why don't you share with folks your thoughts that you recorded yesterday at the Capitol?
Sure. So as I looked at the, extraordinarily disturbing images that I was seeing being broadcast on CNN, I was very concerned about what may be happening at our own Capitol. And so I felt incumbent upon me to go down there and see if there was anything happening here in the state of Iowa. I went down and I saw that it was peaceful. There were several cars parked down there in the reserved lot for our, legislators and senators. So there were people there doing work. Mm-hmm. It's quiet. And so I wanted people to know that, this is the way it should be. We just recently had, obviously an election here in Iowa. Some seats changed hands. People were reelected to office. And, there's no great protest down there over our election or calling it phony or false. I know at one point in time earlier this year, Vice President Biden was at the Iowa State Fairgrounds, and there were several, Trump supporters driving around the state fairgrounds in their trucks, honking their horns and things like that. So I was very concerned about what might be happening at our own Capitol yesterday. So I went down there. I said, that this is why it is so important for us to work so very hard in order to make sure that we continue to register voters, that we continue with our grassroots efforts, that we continue to try to talk to the American public and get them informed on when and how to participate in elections, because who is in office obviously matters. When we see that there are still senators who gave support and comfort to the violent terrorists who attacked our nation's capital yesterday by continuing to oppose the election, it's extremely important that we have the right people in office. And I also thought it was important that people know that, we had no violence going on at our capital. We had no demonstrations going on at our capital here in the state of Iowa. And that's the way things should look after an election. It should be a peaceful transition of power and continue with business as usual. If you're upset that your particular candidate lost, go home, have an extra glass of wine, maybe stay up late and commiserate with friends. But the types of actions that we saw yesterday are nothing short of terrorism and acts by individuals who could be considered traitors. They're trying to use mob rule and violence in order to overthrow an election that was done by every standard as fair and as safe as possible. Even Republican appointed judges who were appointed by Donald Trump said the election was free and fair, and that there was no evidence of mass amounts of fraud as he was claiming. And unfortunately, he continues to stir the crowd.
And Al, to me, what was incredibly shocking yesterday is the difference in how this was treated between the Black Lives Matter protests, and you've got thousands of protesters in front of the Capitol, and the difference. Where were the tanks? Where was the SWAT gear? Where was the shields? It all showed up later. And I want to show. So this right here, I've got this on a loop here. We had there's so much video going through, and folks, I'm just going to leave. Philip Lewis is the journalist who reported this TikToker, Marcus DePaula, who was there. So we're giving credit where credit is due. This right here. So Capitol Police literally, and we don't have audio of what they're saying, but literally just saying we are outnumbered. We're going to start letting you guys up onto this area. That moment right there to me is significant. I cannot imagine that would have been the case had those been Black Lives Matter protesters. Had they been Middle Eastern protesters, my goodness, anybody but white men, no one could have got away with that. To me, that is down to my core outrageous. And I'm pointing fingers at the people that are there. I'm also saying, where was the literal army before that moment right there? Because the prep, and this isn't pointing fingers at, say, the mayor of DC and all that, because there are conflicting reports, and we will find this out, of was the National Guard requested and was it denied? And I don't like to talk about conjecture, because I don't know if that's been proven as to who said what. But the video here does not lie, in that to even get to this stage where, and again, it's on a loop here, you're going to see it again, where there's the police, they start backing up, and then they just turn and they're like, well, we're outnumbered. And the other clip that I don't have, that I'll be showing in the next couple days here, is again this African American Capitol Police officer, and he is got a baton and he's backing up the stairs, and this mob, this ridiculous, shameful mob of thugs push their way into the Capitol, and he's put under an incredibly impossible decision. Is he going to take out his sidearm and start firing and get fired back on, because many of the people in this crowd were armed. Many had bulletproof vests on, which in many areas in the United States, you cannot walk around with bulletproof vests. That's also against local ordinance. But, an armed insurgency. Now, what I will also say that, it was laughably disgraceful. I mean, you've got guys lounging out in chairs, it blows my mind that if that was black skin on those people, that they would have, I cannot imagine how many dead bodies would be laying in front of the U.S. Capitol right now. But as is, they weren't prepared. They just, I don't know what they assumed. I don't know if this was the desired outcome, but there were, the scene, I'm just beside myself. Al, what do you have to say?
Well, I am extremely disgusted and disheartened by the response by law enforcement. Having been down amongst many of the protests that took place here in Des Moines, police immediately reacted with tear gas, with flashbangs, at times charging, the protesters, tackling people to the ground, using multiple officers on one suspect, handcuffing people. I saw people who had their, arms dislocated, and then we also take a look in contrast. How did law enforcement and the authorities that be react to the peaceful Black Lives Matter protest that happened at Lafayette Square just a couple of months ago? Law enforcement was sent in force, drove the protesters back, all so that President Trump could just take a photo op in front of a church he didn't even regularly attend, if he attended ever. And it is absolutely the height of white privilege to take a look at this and say, these individuals were not only allowed to approach the Capitol, they broke into the Capitol. They broke into the private chambers of some of our lawmakers. And who knows what kind of destruction they could have wrought while they were in there? Who knows what sort of personal information or other materials they might have stolen from those offices or destroyed while they were in those offices. And yet the complete response by law enforcement was with kid gloves. Those people were there for hours and there was no coordinated response. And here's the thing that's really disturbing about that. This took days to coordinate. This took a long time to coordinate. They knew that this was happening. They knew that it was coming. President Trump went and spoke before this mob, and he did nothing to dissuade them from the actions that they took. He did nothing to say to them, listen, I know that you're upset. Stay here, make your protest, make your voice be heard, but, let's make sure that we keep this peaceful. Instead, what does he do? He comes out later and says, once again, this election was stolen from you. It was stolen from me. It was a fraudulent election, and we love you. And he finally did say, go home in peace. But I think that was a little, too little, too late.
Well, I'm going to interrupt you right there, Al. Let's talk about what he said. So the last Black Lives Matter this summer, he said a simple phrase: when the looting starts, the shooting starts. That's what he said back then. Then during the election, they said, do you condemn white supremacy? He goes, Proud Boys, stand down and stand by. So they did just that. Then yesterday, he said, eventually he said, go home, we love you. Go home, we love you. Now, people, I am furious that there have been people who said, well, this mob, my goodness, this mob right here. Well, the people who actually broke in, that was Antifa. That was thugs that came to make it look bad. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. These were people that came here to go to the protest, that were instructed to be there by the President of the United States. And they have to own it. And, it is dark humor, but I heard Jeremy Dumkrieger posted on the internet. He goes, for hundreds of years, it's been illegal to wear masks in public. And for the first time, when these guys could have been anonymous, they decided to go in without masks on their face. And I know that local media here has been asked by local law enforcement to go through B-roll to find faces of Iowans at the protest this summer so they can coordinate activities to prevent those people from protesting in the future. So what I demand is that this video, all these photos of people, my goodness, and all you got to do is do a Google search of literally people like climbing down the chambers in the Senate. The guy sitting in the Speaker of the House's chair. The Speaker of the House is second in line to the presidency. It goes to, the fragility of the democracy itself, that these people are not only hunted down, they are prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Donald Trump, they say there's always a tweet. He said, maximum federal charges will be brought against Black Lives Matter protesters this summer. 10 years federal charges. That's what he tweeted this summer. I demand similar treatment for these folks. And the aggression that was shown at uniformed police officers pushing their way in. I mean, you had people pushing against doors, smashing, getting overrun, pushed into. It's, if you caught this out of, so I was taping for the show yesterday, and I caught a lot of this out of sequence. And I saw video. The first video I saw was these thugs, these idiots, these terrorists wandering around the inside of the Capitol. I'm like, well, this is a strange escalation, or what's exactly happening, because that looked like a bunch of idiots taking photographs. They look like badly dressed tourists. And so I'm like, oh, well, let's find out what. Then you dig backwards. They literally push themselves in. And I've spent, folks, I don't know how many days at the U.S. Capitol for Roske on Politics. I did a lot of filming there in the Rotunda, in the Rayburn building, in the actual Capitol itself as well. There are so many entrances, there's so many exits. And I know from just being there with Senator Strauss this summer that there are, because most of Capitol visitation has been closed down for pandemic, there is limited team there and all that sort of thing. But when you know that literally thousands of people are coming to protest a piece of a government activity, let's take it to that step, that there was no preparation. I mean, my goodness, you folks have seen the line of National Guard, full SWAT gear ready in front of the Lincoln Memorial, there to protect our nation and our democracy and all those things. And they said, how dare you even consider marching on these monuments? Well, these creeps, these idiots yesterday marched on the Capitol and succeeded. Now, was it a well-formed militia? Did they show up with long guns and ready to battle? No. Does that mean it's any less impactful? I don't think so. I think this is a wake-up call. I think, white people who don't want to hear it roll their eyes when they hear the term white privilege. This right here is what it is. I don't think there's ever been a more stark example of, and again, I've got it on a loop, this moment where you're going to see it again at the police officer, and they just turn and walk away. Again, just imagine if those were black folks marching their way forcibly into the Capitol. Al, I'm just really angered by this.
Well, so am I, because, when I see the amount of violence that was used against people who were protesting for racial equality and social justice, and then now you look at these individuals were barely dealt with. I remember yesterday watching individuals just wander by officers as they were walking around and leaving and doing all sorts of. Nobody was stopping them. Nobody was arresting them. Nobody was harassing them. They had free reign. Yeah. As I said before, they knew that this was coming. They could have been calling out to different law enforcement agencies and had an entire setup, to be able to deal with this before they even got there. But no, they did not. And then once it did happen, there was absolutely no response. And you can no longer tell me that any response that you make to people who are protesting for racial equality and social justice is justified when you're using, acts of violence to stop them. When you allow this to happen, which is actually a violent insurrection and an attempt to overthrow an election, a fairly and freely won election, and then this is what we allow to happen, it's disgusting. It's offensive. It's white privilege in a way that I hope everybody really understands what this means. That if you're black, your life is forfeit. If you're white, you can do whatever you darn well please. And it makes me really nervous sometimes just to walk around as a black man, that what the heck is going to happen to me and somebody's going to justify it. That it's going to be seen that, oh, well, He was a large, angry, dangerous black man. And you're right. Right now, I am angry because people were allowed to invade our capital and commit acts of destruction and get away with it because they were white. Whereas if there are people who are protesting for racial justice and equality, those individuals are attacked with tear gas, flashbangs, and are hauled away and given maximum federal sentences. Give me a break.
Yeah. And again, I'm gonna keep showing this clip here to give some more context. This is this is literally on this part of the Capitol. This was the last line of defense. It's not like they were saying, okay, let's get you into a different part of the area outside. And to me, folks, that's a hard line. I don't care what group is outside of the United States Capitol. You're not allowed in forcibly. The U.S. Capitol is a public building. When you go through metal detectors and you have a stated purpose to be there, you are welcomed, certainly as a citizen, to be there, as long as you have business to be there and you go through metal detectors. That's how it works. You can't just show up and go to other parts of the Capitol. You can go to the visitors part of the Capitol. But this, folks, the fact that not only did the people here, I mean, did each of them know that they were doing something illegal? You can't force your way into the Capitol. Well, the police officer's reaction here, you know, I will be trying to get literally these human beings to be on this program to talk about, you know, it's all radio, folks. And you know, we think about, boy, this summer has shown us some examples of police officers who have gone outside of what they were supposed to be doing and made bad choices. But it's always on radio. And when you've got something like this, like what was the communication going on here when they started backing up and they said, you know what, screw it, we're just going to let them keep coming. That to me, it's not only a breakdown of what's supposed to happen. What was supposed to happen is they were supposed to say, your protest area is over there. If you come over here, we will stop you. We will forcibly do so. Just like the Des Moines police officers did in front of the Iowa Capitol. I mean, my goodness, they arrested a Des Moines Register reporter. She still has charges against her for right. I'm a reporter. That's the level of force that was shown this summer. Here it's well, I'm sure it'll be fine. And that is the synapse that I'm talking about, where, you know, Al, you just mentioned, I mean, Al, you're taller than I am. You walk down the street and cops get their guard up. People get their guard up. This, they not only didn't get their guard up, they were aw shucks in it. Well, come on in, guys. Heck, all right, let's come take a look around. And there are there's other scenes. They broke windows to get in. They climbed down, they climbed up walls. It was a crazy mob. It was an
invasion.
It was an invasion. It was a silly invasion. They looked like idiots. And I want that to be clear, that this wasn't, you know, it'd be one thing if it was groups of armed militia. That'd be one thing. These were, but the point I'm making is they either didn't know what they were doing was illegal because they weren't treated as doing something illegal. No. Whereas this summer, the Black Lives Matter protesters, Al, you were there in front of the Capitol. They, you know, I think you tell me the escalation. You were there. First night, maybe it was a little less, and then they started tear gassing. What was the escalation day by day as to how the authorities handled the protests?
On the very first night, tear gas was being fired. Flashbangs were being thrown. Officers would line up in a line and literally charge the crowd to tackle and arrest people. Like I said, I saw people being hurt badly, you know, and that happened, you know, time and again. You know, when we talk about the number of people there was a crowd of 30,000 down there at the United States Capitol yesterday. There were only 15 arrests made so far that I know of. And you know, you compare that to the protest that took place this past summer in Des Moines and how many people were arrested, you know, at each one of those protests. And you also look at the fact that when there was that incident at Hy-Vee where people said, oh, well, they're destroying property, they're doing bad things and blah, blah, blah. They then, you know, got photos of those people from the media and then sought out those individuals into their own protest they had at the Capitol and started polling people from the crowd to arrest them. Here we have obvious photos. We have idiots who are sitting there taking selfies of themselves, sitting in, Speaker Pelosi's office. And I certainly hope they go and arrest that individual for insurrection.
Yeah.
And yet, who knows what they're going to do? After watching yesterday, I have no faith at all that law enforcement is going to do anything to these individuals. And that is disgusting to me, because there is no clear way to show that there is no equality and justice in this nation. When you are protesting for civil rights and equality and you have black skin, you're going to be arrested and go to jail, and you're going to be brutalized by officers. If you are white and you decide that you want to go ahead and invade the Capitol and destroy property, and here's the other thing. I just saw an interview on CNN with one of the congresswomen who was involved in yesterday's incident, and they knew that some of these people were armed, and she was scared for her life. She thought that these people might come in and actually do bodily harm to her, if not take her life. Now, that is a far cry from what happened this summer. Mm-hmm. They did not invade the Capitol with people breaking in windows, smashing in. And part of it was because there was such a strong police presence beforehand. Lines of officers in full riot gear with full military equipment, even a large tank that was a tank-like vehicle that was pulled up in front of the State House. And here we have, elected officials fearing for their lives. And I would say that it would not only be the elected officials on the Democratic side. I'm pretty sure there were certain Republicans that were fearing for their lives as well. Yeah. And what really disgusts me about this whole thing is not just that these people were treated with kid gloves, but there were elected officials who went up yesterday and still opposed this election, objected to it being certified, to give these people more excuses to conduct the same behavior. They gave them aid and comfort. And giving aid and comfort to an enemy of the United States is what we define as treason. Mm-hmm. And so I hope that every single person that got up and objected to the certification of this election, that people remember those names and that they call for them to be removed from office, because they are encouraging these people to do the same thing. One of the things that was written down and put on Nancy Pelosi's in Nancy Pelosi's office, we all saw the picture of it yesterday, is "We will never back down," which means it's very possible this type of, nonsense is going to happen again. And I can only pray two things: that number one, next time we have a better response to this, and we treat this like, we did the Black Lives Matter protests, and go after these people. Because otherwise, my faith in the equality of justice in this country is going to be shaken to its core, and I'm just simply not going to believe it anymore. And two, after the president's reaction to this yesterday and not calling these people out, I hope that he is removed from office now, because 13 more days of this nonsense is no way to run a country. That we're going to have to sit on pins and needles and hope that this knucklehead will actually do something to defend this country, rather than think about himself and his own sycophants and supporters.
Yeah, and you talk about what you're talking about is display of force, right? The protests this summer, you showed up, they were ready to go. They were treating it like a battle. Here they're treating it like, well, this is different because you've got literally the president of the United States saying march to the Capitol. So as law enforcement, you're getting mixed signals. You've got the commander in chief saying, well, go over there, go march on the Capitol. So it's not like what he said this summer, you've got to show signs of strength, is what he instructed law enforcement across this nation to do. Yesterday, he said, go march on the Capitol. And this is the result. You talk, these people are, police officers are actually instructed to follow orders. They're instructed to follow protocol. They're instructed to do as instructed. Now, one of the most horrible examples of that is the officers who stood by and watched the man choke out George Floyd. They were instructed to create a perimeter around which the senior officer could do what he likes. That is the most horribly disgusting display of following orders. This right here is following orders in another sense. The lack of orders. When the commander in chief says, go march on the Capitol, and he doesn't say, show signs of strength. He doesn't say, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. That is direct communication that these folks were following. Well, I guess the president said, come on over here. Let's let them in. This group did. Other groups of police officers fought, pushed up against barricades, and a woman got shot and killed yesterday in the Capitol. We used to say before the Civil War that, the gentleman who got hitting the head with the cane on the House floor. That was as outrageous as it's ever gotten. Well, this is the new history, folks. This is the new thing that in another 20, 50, 100 years, they say, the Trump presidency was so off the rails that at the end of it, someone got shot and killed in the Capitol. That's how this works, folks. And you know, we get so, it's almost like we get desensitized because news comes at us in so many different ways now. I mean, again, and I want to give credit here, this TikToker, Marcus DePaula. Thank you, Marcus, for filming this yesterday and posting it. But we get news so differently. We don't have, it's almost like it loses its context, it loses its profundity, and we don't look at it through the lens of history. Folks, let me tell you, all the news you ever read about the Civil War, what happened at the Capitol then, you know, someone said something about a family member, a member of Congress went up and hit the person over the head. They were, for the rest of their lives, they had trouble. It was a fairly serious injury. But yesterday, someone was shot and killed inside the U.S. Capitol from a protest on an American election. That is how the lens of history will look at this. And we cannot, everyone wants to shrug this activity off. Well, it was this. Well, it was this. Again, people saying, well, the people who actually did the bad stuff was an Antifa. They were people there just to make the protest look bad. Folks, you can't do that anymore. You're not hiding behind anything. This was called out. I mean, I'll give credit where credit is due. They said we're going to do this, and they did it. The fact that the law enforcement, I know that in the next weeks, there will be investigations as to who decided not to have the display of force that Al just described during Black Lives Matter protests. Like, to me, that's a click of a button now because they had a whole summer of practice about it. We've got a protest that could turn violent. Here's what we do. The fact that it wasn't anywhere instituted like that, to me, it's outrageous. Jobs should be lost. Potential charges should be brought about because, folks, we have a homicide now. You know, Al just mentioned people getting their shoulders dislocated, and we know people got injured at the protests here in Iowa. We know people got injured at the protests across the street from the White House. You know, the scene, the shameful and disgraceful scene that Al mentioned. You know, it was an Australian TV crew, and you can watch that footage too, just get bashed out of the way. And they're literally just sitting there filming the protest. They got bashed out of the way because the president wanted to come through and get his picture taken. Well, here, where was the show of force? Where was the prep that said we know thousands of people are coming? Folks, we all saw the Twitter photos on the airplanes. They're projecting Trump on the ceilings of the airplanes. These clowns, these idiots coming from all over the country, probably all over the world. It was a circus. They knew, and you know what, folks? They thought it'd be a free-for-all, and they were right. And we now have a homicide in the Capitol, and that's what we know about right now. What as the days come out, as more information comes out, I'm sure we're going to find more things to be outraged by. But again, I don't want us to forget through the lens of history. Yesterday, and the only way I can look at this is not positively, but the only way I can look at this is not a disgraceful shame on our country. And again, if we look back at these Boris Johnson disgraceful scenes in the U.S. Congress, that doesn't happen in a bubble. He didn't say that in a bubble. That's been carried worldwide. That is how the world viewed what happened yesterday in our country. It lands at one person's feet, and that's the president of the United States. He incited it. He asked for it. He spoke at their protest. Just imagine if Donald Trump would have spoke at a Black Lives Matter protest. And if he would have incited that, brought it up to something like this, the outrage that would have happened. The only positive thing that I can see about this is that, to me, and hopefully to literally millions of other Americans, you now see in stark contrast what it truly means to have different behaviors toward groups of people based purely on race and intention. It is that literally black and white, folks. When you've got a group of white men coming at the Capitol, They get shrugged, they get turned. We're going to see it again. Here's the turn. Well, I guess we're going this way because the crowd wants to do so. If you're a group of black folks, brown folks out there, you're going to get taken down. You're going to get tackled. You're going to get tear gassed. And it's also going to be prepared for. I hope that the takeaway, at least for white people who have been denying this, is to look at this and to compare it to the behavior not only that Al described, but the countless examples of video, the arrests that were made, the treatment of them. And again, Al, to your point, after the fact, I want people going through every one of these clips. I want to find out names. I want to know faces, and I want to see handcuffs, and I want to see charges, because these were not peace signs. These were not, make love, not war. Many of these folks had on military fatigues. They had military helmets on. They had bulletproof vests on. They came to fight. They came to conflict. And so an act of aggression toward the United States, toward our government, must be handled, must be dealt with, and fiercely.
Yeah, I want to go back to something that you said earlier, that some of these people were following orders. Well, there's following orders, and then there's human decency. There's following orders, and then there's knowing what's right. There's following orders, and then there's saying, what is the best way for me to conduct myself as a fellow human being? Those officers that saw Siobhan, or that officer who was kneeling on the neck of George Floyd, they could have pushed him off and say, hey, wait a minute, you shouldn't be doing this.
Yep.
Let's maybe arrest this man if we feel he needs to be arrested. There is no reason for you to be kneeling on this man's neck with your full body weight for almost 9 minutes. There's human decency. There's human decency in saying that man is an unarmed subject. Do not shoot him. If he has a weapon in his hand, there is no reason for you to pull out a gun and put a bullet through his body. And then there's also knowing what's right and wrong in this particular instance. Allowing, like you said, you watch that video clip of those officers turning away. You watch the video clip of there's officers lined along the streets, and then there you see all the protesters up at the Capitol, not making a move to disperse them or to get rid of them. No use of tear gas, no use of flashbangs, no use of anything to be able to drive these people away. There's following orders, and there's receiving what's right. The idea, and I do understand what you're saying, Brent, I really do. But to me, these individuals being able to hide behind the statement of I was just following orders is, to me, complete horse crap.
My point, Al, was that at least that was the infrastructure in place that created the George Floyd murder. They were instructed to do a hierarchy of things. My point is, yesterday, I don't see any example of hierarchy of orders that were given and orders trying to be followed.
Yeah, there was, first of all, leadership comes from the top, right? We all know that. That leadership should have been, instead of leadership, asking these people to do things in different ways, leadership encouraged this. They fomented this, and he's been doing that pretty much since, Biden won the nomination, not willing to commit to a peaceful transfer of power. And obviously we see he's not willing to commit to a peaceful transfer of power. Lord only knows what's going to happen between now and the 20th, when Biden is supposed to be sworn in as president. If you're not nervous and you're not thinking that this is somehow going to descend into further chaos, unless Trump is removed immediately from office, then you're kidding yourself to think that this will be the only time. And you're also kidding yourself if you don't think that after Trump is out of office, he's going to use his platform to continue to try to encourage this type of action. I mean, do we really think that once he leaves office, that he's going to stop doing and saying these outrageous things? This man has the most massive ego in the world. It's all about him. And he realizes, for some reason, these twisted sycophants of his, these thugs, these terrorists, that they will do whatever he wants. They follow his every word. So if he starts continuing to call for these types of actions, do we really think that these people will not continue to rise to that? I can only hope and pray that that is not the case. But after what I saw yesterday, and after what I saw the reaction from the police was, and from the president, it makes me very nervous to think that this type of thing might be called for again before he leaves office. and even after office, and that the response from law enforcement will be nothing more than disgraceful.
And I want to bring up one more time this President Bush. This is how election results are disputed in a banana republic. What he's saying is, we're used to in this country flipping on the news and seeing mobs in the streets in other countries, and we shrug our shoulders and say, well, at least it's not here. Those and you know, it's always kind of alluded to, the on-air people, the media, everybody, we kind of make it seem like they're not really as smart as we are. We kind of make it seem like, well, that's because they're a different culture, and it's always kind of a wink and a nod, like, well, you know, good old-fashioned white Americans wouldn't do that sort of thing. We'd never look like a bunch of idiots in the streets, a bunch of mob wandering around. That's how election results are disputed in a banana republic. And then what do you know? Here we go. Yesterday, it's exactly what happened here. Literally, a mob rule in the streets of D.C. Folks, it's unacceptable. It has to be dealt with. And Al, I'm with you 100% that now that, I mean, we've all got, I bet there's countless hours, cell phone video, photographs. I demand that law enforcement go through it. They bring charges and that they throw the book at each one of these, because if you are forcing your way past police officers, past authority outside the seat of our government, that goes to the fabric of this nation. And I don't think that there is a list of charges that is too extreme to bring upon people who thought that was fine. Were they instructed by the president to do so? Go march on the Capitol. That is not a get out of jail free card. So, Al, thank you so much for being on the program today. You know, folks, I started this program to get away from politics, to talk more about life issues. We will be doing that. But what happened yesterday was just, it was too much of a stark, not even reminder to me. It was just plain old proof at the discrepancy on how white people are treated than black and brown people in this country. That to me was the outrage. I'm so grateful to you, Al, for coming on the program. You've been a good friend, and I appreciate you speaking from the heart today. And just, you know, letting folks know that this is not an isolated incident, that what we saw this summer was just a stark contrast to what we saw yesterday. So thanks so much for coming on the program, buddy.
Thank you very much. And, you know, I will say that, you know, the other thing that we really have to think about is how is Trump stirring up these people going to affect the Biden presidency going forward, having effective government moving forward? And are we going to expect this type of reaction every time a Republican loses, that they're going to stir up this kind of trouble? But thank you for having me on, Brent. You know, I really do appreciate it. Hopefully we're going to find a better way forward. I always have to be an optimist, because, you know, it's better to look towards the good and hope that's going to happen, rather than just wallowing in the misery that's out there. But that's my fervent hope, that we can all work together, that all of us can see this is wrong and move in a better direction as a country.
Thanks, buddy. And thank you, everyone, for watching. Tomorrow, we have Chris Boyan, who is the Senior Communications Officer of the United Nations High Commission on Refugees. That's on tomorrow's program.